Hello and welcome to another Treasury Talent LinkedIn live chat. This is Joe Grabowski, joined by Scotty John today. Simon is out of pocket. He's actually on the beach with his children today. So in this conversation, we will not be chatting with the practitioner. We ran into a bit of a scheduling issue. So we are going to cover hiring trends in Treasury, what we've seen since the first of the year. That'll be the live discussion that Scotty and I will talk through. We're going to do a deep dive into the markets, including just a general feel for the market, which markets were busier than others, how hiring breaks down between basically the Treasury hierarchy and what we think it means for the rest of the first quarter leading into the second quarter. So if you do have any questions along the way, please feel free to reach out. This is your opportunity to ask me and Scotty questions about what we're seeing in the market. We get these questions frequently. We're more than happy to address them here. Scotty is currently on mute and monitoring the conversation. So, fire away. We'll make sure that we're keeping an eye on that as we're talking. But as soon as he's ready, we're going to jump right into this. So with that, the general feel for this. Oh, hey, Scotty, how are you?
Doing well, Joe. Thanks. How about yourself?
Doing well, thank you. So obviously you've had the opportunity to take a look at these numbers and we've put this in the January newsletter, but what's your general feel on the market? Let's just talk through that for a minute.
Yeah. So general feel on the market is we're definitely seeing an uptick. It's continuing with the trend that we started to see the second half of 2020. But it's accelerated. And it's not a huge surprise to us. We've talked about this countless times. Treasury is such a critical function when it comes to cash and liquidity, and we're still in the midst of a liquidity crisis here. So it wasn't a matter of if, but when the demand for the function was going to kind of catch up. And we're starting to see that now. We've got some, I'd say, I don't know about surprising, but we've got some unique insights into some of that that we'll get into, Joe. But in general, that's my feeling on the market. Anything you'd add there?
No, I mean, well, yeah, a little bit, but it is in general, it does feel like it is getting much busier. You typically have that slowdown. Granted, we're still going through our first iterations of this, right? But you do typically have that slowdown between the holidays and the end of the year. We certainly experienced that. And then budgets do tend to typically renew depending on when the company's fiscal years reset. They do tend to renew first quarter. And that has certainly been the case. I know the last couple of weeks have been extremely busy. But that, to your point, really ties back to a trend that we started to identify back in July, which was you have a massive uptick in jobs that have essentially just continued to pop up. And it's been month to month, about 50% new jobs, 50% jobs previously posted. So you have a finite candidate supply within Treasury. It's not like you have a new crop of people coming in all the time. Usually it's going to be from the analyst level or something, or maybe you're flipping bankers over or whatever it may be, but you don't have that consistent crop that's coming in. So it continues to put pressure on this finite candidate supply. And we're certainly seeing that in the market. So before we jump into it, any questions from the audience?
No, thus far, no.
All right, cool. So our benchmarks that we set basically for the last portion, or I'm sorry, the portion of last year, we benchmarked based off of the first quarter average and what we saw for jobs pre-pandemic. And that's kind of what we held as the standard for the rest of the year and what we used to compare and look back. Now that we have a full year's worth of data, we have changed our benchmark to the average number of jobs that were posted over the course of the year. We're not going to discuss that publicly because that's free data that we're not going to give away to anyone who isn't our client. But if you do want to talk about it further, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We're happy to open that up to you. But in January, we were honestly 49% above benchmark. So January was a very, very busy month. As I mentioned, it continued a trend that we saw that started probably second quarter heading into third quarter in 2020, and that trend is certainly continuing into 2021. Scotty, is there anything about that catches your eye or any thoughts around that?
Well, I think that the thing that catches my eye in particular is the fact that, yes, there are 50% more positions in January than there were in the most normal averaged quarter, or I should say monthly average from last year. But like you mentioned, we're seeing a pretty even split for the new jobs versus reposted jobs. So basically, we're seeing a lot of jobs that have gone unfilled. Some of those jobs went unfilled the entire year in 2020. And I think that's an interesting insight. And it's not surprising to you and I, Joe, given we stare at these numbers every day, but I'm sure it's surprising to, especially those folks who aren't actively on the job market right now, to hear that there are so many jobs that have gone unfilled. Again, like we're talking about for over a year at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, even to your point of that, the benchmark data, again, 49% above benchmark, only 45% roughly of those jobs were new. Meaning that if you're sitting in the job seeker seat, you're hearing that we're talking about a lot of opportunities, but a lot of those opportunities have been out there, may not necessarily be new to you. Now, if you're sitting in the hiring manager seat, not only if your job's going unfilled, you have a new crop of jobs that you're competing with potentially at the level that you're trying to hire every single month, if not every day or every week. So if you're not motivated, or if you have an opening and you're struggling to find people, it's only going to get worse would be my prediction on this. And I'm not trying to paint the doom and gloom scenario, but it is, like we talked about, you have a finite candidate supply, more and more opportunities. The other thing that we're running into, or will be running into within the next couple of months here, is people are waiting on their year-end bonuses. The year-end bonuses may not necessarily be as strong as they have other years, depending on the company. And that's when you look at the recruiting cycle overall, you see a lot of people who want to make moves after that. So kind of getting into our predictions for what this means over the next couple of months. But is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think just want to draw attention to the fact that the majority of the jobs that we saw in January, again, no surprise, I'm sure to many people, but slight surprise to me that we saw even more Treasury analyst positions. Usually there's a pretty even split in the percentage of Treasury analyst versus Treasury manager. Mm-hmm. And it's much higher in terms of analysts to manager in the January data. So I think that what that says to me is, a Treasury analyst role. We talk to people, this is more anecdotal at this point, we talk to hiring managers often about wanting experience at that level. And obviously we try and be diplomatic about this. And for anybody who's watching us right now, that's a hiring manager, I want you to know that we're not laughing behind your back here. However, I have to laugh a little bit at the fact that you're not going to attract an analyst into an analyst job. Yeah. They recognize that they are in high demand. Analysts are going to move for a senior analyst or a manager position. That's all there is to it. So I think, I thought that was interesting, that the high percentage of analyst roles, and the fact that, like you were saying, it's not going to get any easier. If you're a hiring manager, do yourself a favor, come up with a profile focused on attributes, and recognize you're going to have to do some training. You will save yourself months in the long run, because otherwise you'll just sit there with an open position month over month.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get feedback from the market all the time. Hey, this position's been open for months. What's wrong with it? Why shouldn't I apply to this? Or why haven't I heard back? We can answer those questions all the time, but the majority of it is there is kind of that stagnation factor, or that I guess we could call it the rotting factor. I call it stinky fish. Is when you have those positions that sit out there. Treasury is a very small world. I think we all know that, where word gets around and people are paying attention, whether they're active or not, into what's going on in the market. And analysts specifically, even to your point, about 42% so analysts made up about 45% of the jobs that were advertised in January. It's trending that way toward February too. And in January, 42% of those jobs were new, which means, the 58% were already sitting out there. So if you do have plans, to your point, if you do have plans to hire an analyst, that is honestly the hardest role that we have to recruit in the entire Treasury hierarchy, or the the points that we've already talked about. Like, you don't have your entry point. There isn't a new batch of analysts that are entering the space every year. That's why, the common conversations we have is you better be able to sell your career path if you are looking to hire an analyst, and the WIFM, you better have that sales pitch down if you're trying to draw another experienced analyst, or consider making it a senior treasury analyst, potentially a treasury manager, or start looking at your FP&A team or your accounting team to see who has that potential to to move into an analyst role so that you can start to grow your own. And it does require a little bit of a planning and a little bit of extra legwork to make sure that these people are properly indoctrinated. But I mean, that's your own embarrassment of riches within your own organization right there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think just the one key point that I want to draw attention to that you just mentioned is, understanding the business need and the market, and how the relationship between the two. Because I'll give you an example. So I spoke to a hiring manager recently about, and in fairness, it was, the question was asked about wanting an analyst with capital markets experience. And I don't know about you, Joe, but I don't even know if I can count on one hand how many analysts I know that have capital markets experience. So, if your business need is somebody with capital markets, and but you want to hire at the analyst level and pay analyst compensation, you better start looking at a minimum senior analyst, if not manager, because I think it's going to be a painful road if that job gets posted as is today.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, it ties into another common point that we often talk about with clients, which is, at analyst, you're still hiring for potential. You're not hiring the finished product. And even in some cases, managers, you're still looking for that person who has that room to grow and is not the finished product. So the clients that we work with that have the easier times hiring are those who have that type of flexibility, understand exactly what they need and what they can build on. So having that base foundation of technical skills, and then willing to take that chance on someone who wants to learn or wants to develop, wants to grow into a role. That's the easiest way that you can really solve your hiring challenges within Treasury.
Yep.
So next, just to round that out along those same lines, is Treasury manager made up about 23% of those jobs. So between your two entry points into Treasury, typically your analyst managers, you're looking at, we're calling 68%. And here's the thing: is Treasury managers, about 51% of those were new, 49 still reposted, rehashed. If you haven't filled it already, now you're up against more competition because it's trending that way in February too. I'll have February numbers finalized in the next couple days here, and it seems to be the same story that we've identified over the course of the last year plus, has been your analysts and your managers are the competitive hiring spots for companies. So if you have whether you're looking to hire right now, or if you have plans coming up, and I'm talking US only, right? So it's Simon has the presence in Australia, but I should call out that we're talking US stats only. So your analysts and your managers, that's where it's competitive, and that's where you have to have that flexibility. In a lot of cases, hire for potential. And you hear that trend on our Ask a Treasurer. You hear it in practitioner conversations. We hear it in conversations every day, where it's just, hey, I don't check every box. And from a hiring manager perspective, a lot of hiring managers will say, I don't need someone who checks every box. But the ones whose jobs tend to go unfilled are the ones who are like, nope, the market is going to bend to me. I'm not going to bend to the market. And those are the jobs that go unfilled, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to your point, it's competitive for companies to attract the analyst and manager talent, just because, again, simple supply versus demand. There's just way more demand than there is supply, especially, like you say, when you start getting into a kind of rigid, hey, I need this experience and I need this number of years or whatever it might be. Per usual, what we've seen in past breakdowns, it's the opposite is true once you get into director and above. And then the competitiveness actually comes where there's a greater supply of people who are competing for the same jobs. We find, for whatever reason, often that, pretty much at the director and above level, title isn't as important. So you end up seeing treasurer jobs, and or or I should say, you end up seeing directors who are open to other director roles. Of course, an AT or a treasurer job would be great, but you also see treasurers and ATs who are open to director jobs. I mean, they're not as worried about the title as they are the scope and the responsibility. So that no surprises this time around in terms of what we've seen in that data, right?
No, and I do want to throw in, just you're also up against the senior managers or the managers who have that potential, who can jump into director too. So it's not always the case, because I know we talk to a lot of job seekers and they're like, well, why haven't I heard back about this? Why haven't I been selected, or what's going on here? And it's not always the case of what you have or what you don't have, it's who you're up against. And that's probably the most important thing to understand as you embark on your job search from a job seeker perspective. Is there are so many things that you can't control. You have to really nail what you can control and not worry about the rest. As much as it's easy for me to say and not do, that's the easiest way you're going to keep yourself sane if you plan to look for a job once you do get that bonus, or if you are looking for a job right now. Is it may not necessarily be anything that's wrong with you. There is a job out there for you. It's just more so you're up against some stiff competition, especially as you make that pivot into director and above. So just from a statistics perspective, director jobs made up about 9% of jobs in January. Only 42% of those were new. So you're looking at 58% that have been reposted. Assistant treasurer made up 2%. Only 33.3% of those jobs were new. And then treasurer jobs, 5% and 50% were new. So what you're seeing is, while it may be very competitive for companies that are trying to hire at those lower levels, those analysts and those managers, at director level and above, it's almost like you have an embarrassment of riches. And what happens is these recruiting teams and these treasurers, I'm going to put it more on the recruiting teams, to be perfectly honest, is you have so many options where it almost becomes paralysis by analysis. And you're just like, okay, I have this wealth of riches, like they're going to bend to us. So many people have expressed interest, and then these people slowly start to get picked off, and then those jobs are staying open longer and longer. So it's either slow processes, or just taking your time, dragging your feet on making decisions, waiting for that right person to come along. And meanwhile, you still have more jobs that are entering the market. It may not be 50% or above like the lower levels, but it's still putting pressure on your candidate supply, and it is competitive for you in some ways. So my advice on this is, when you find the right person, even if that person's 75% of the way there, yes, I know it's dangerous. Hiring is an inexact science, but in some cases you have to hire for potential too. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that we face as recruiters. We don't manufacture, we're not selling cogs in a wheel, we're not selling sprockets, right? We can't manufacture people. We can only bring you who's available and interested in the market. And that's the same is true for your internal recruitment team or your HR team. Is, if you're approaching the market the wrong way, or if you're being too picky and you don't have a solid understanding of that market, that's what's keeping your job open that much longer, and your competition's moving. And I think a lot of people kind of take that for granted, because we never pop our head up to take a look at the rest of the hiring landscape to see what else is going around. I know you've had a lot of conversations like that have come to great surprise with clients and potential clients, just how competitive it is at the senior levels. Even entry level, you kind of think maybe I can see it, but you get into the senior levels and it's just as competitive, because there are a lot of companies that are hiring, and again, you still have a finite amount of people who can do that job.
Yeah, the just such a critical point that I want to revisit, and that is, when you have a candidate that you like, and your thought as a hiring manager is, yeah, I like them, they could do the job, but I want to see what else, who else is out there. That's a very dangerous thought process. We see it often. And, to be fair, we've also seen where hiring managers can get away with it sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? They'll go back and revisit a candidate that they liked, and that candidate's either still open to making a move or still available or whatever it might be. So it's not like it's going to bite you every time, but especially in this job market, what we're describing and what we're seeing right now, I just don't anticipate that's going to continue to be the case. So if you like somebody and you start to think to yourself, well, I just really like to see who else is out there, just recognize that how much how do you think this person can do the job? Because it's like you say, Joe, we can't manufacture people. Your internal team can't manufacture people. Oftentimes we talk about it, everybody wants the great candidate that's heads down and passive and working today, but those candidates, they don't need to make a move, especially if they're happy. So it's contrary to popular belief, we're not really salespeople. We just present information, and same thing goes with candidates. It's like we present opportunities. We probably add a little more color and context around those opportunities than you're going to get for a job posting. I shouldn't say probably, we absolutely do, but we're not going to convince somebody to leave their job for a job. Like, that's counterproductive, because all that's going to do is you don't want to sell a bill of goods. So anyhow, I think we've driven that point home. But
I think you bring up a good point. I think we've probably used this analogy before, but once you have that person that you feel good about and you just want to see what else is out there, you've made this point, I think, in a couple of LinkedIn posts and otherwise, this is very much like dating. And think about your wife or your husband as you were dating them before you got married. It's like, well, yeah, I want to get married, but I just want to see what else is out there. How does that go over? I know my wife, I'd be a single man. So the whole thing is as tough as it can be, and as many hurdles as there may be to hiring and firing, once you have that feel that this person could be it, you have to move, because that person may not be around forever. You may luck out. I mean, we can't speak in absolutes in this business. I think dealing with people would be irresponsible to do so. But once you have that feeling, and once it's starting to head down that path, and once you find someone who is that potential match, it's worth exploring as far as you possibly can and gathering as much information. This goes for job seekers too. Gather as much information as you can to make the best decision for you. And I know it can be scary, but you have to pull the trigger once you've gathered all the information you can. There's no certainty in hiring. It's an inexact science.
Yeah, and now that you brought up the analogy, you're absolutely right. I do feel like it's an apt analogy. Something about human psychology, right? Where we see it often. It's the same in dating that it is in hiring. As a hiring manager, for whatever reason, we see people oftentimes wanting what they can't have. So you're, as a hiring manager, trying to sell somebody who's turned down a job offer, for instance. You're trying to sell them all the reasons on why they should accept the job. And because you think they're fantastic, you think they're great. But why do you think that? Is it really because they're better than a second, quote unquote, second choice candidate who's very interested? Or is it because they've turned you down? That's, I don't know the answer in every case. Of course, it's case by case, but I would argue there's absolutely something to the fact that, we want those that we can't have sometimes. So like you say, Joe, it's, it's, if it shouldn't feel like you're settling per se, but remember, a lot of people can do certain jobs. There's a lot of people who can do a job out there. And, when you feel like you've just got your choice of people, this is not commodities. These are people. And you're going to eventually create a reputation for yourself and your company out there in the marketplace, if that's how you treat folks. So,
yeah. So before we wrap up here, any questions, comments, anything that's coming through on LinkedIn?
Haven't seen any questions or comments come through. I'll go on mute here real quick, Joe, and just refresh one more time. But we've gotten some likes. Thanks to those of you who've liked this and shared it by virtue of that. But yeah, feel free. Now's the time. If you have questions around this data in particular, I should say these data, please.
Yeah, and even to that point, if there's anything that we've talked about today that's catching your attention or kind of has you going, oh crap, no matter which side of the seat that you're sitting or which side of the hiring equation you find yourself on, whether it's job seeking or if you're looking to hire, whether you're actively hiring now or you're looking to hire in the next couple of months, and maybe you don't want to put it out there publicly, let's talk. I mean, it's a situation where we're happy to give you a market overview. We're happy to dig deeper into these stats with you and really give you a realistic picture of what's happening in the market around you. So with that, now that you're back and off of mute, Scotty the Oracle, what does this mean for the next couple of months in your eyes?
Yeah, I'm going to hedge a little here,
Yeah, of course.
and just and just make the disclaimer that of course this is my opinion, but you already mentioned it, Joe, and I think my educated guess around what I'm about to say comes directly as a result of what you mentioned, and that is it's bonus season. You just had a really hard year for so many reasons, but as Treasury professionals, the theme is working 16-hour days and doing historic things. And the reality is, sadly, we've heard way too many people who are underwhelmed with the bonuses they're receiving. It's not commensurate with the work that they put in last year. So I'm anticipating a ton of movement. Obviously, when people leave jobs, that opens up needs at the jobs they're leaving. So, yeah, I anticipate we're going to just continue to see this trend of upward numbers in terms of new jobs, and I hope we start seeing some of these jobs that have been open filled. But sadly, I think we might continue just to see more and more jobs open, and more jobs staying remaining unfilled. So that's my
Yeah. And then that's exactly why we have these chats and why we put out the newsletter and that type of stuff. It's not a sales pitch for us. I mean, yeah, it's content, it's everything else. But at the same time, for as much as our business is built off of movement, it doesn't do us any good to place people only to have them move at the same time. That damages our credibility. And we speak with so many job seekers who are disillusioned. We speak with employees who are disillusioned for the same reasons that you had mentioned. So uh, if you're in a treasury leader seat, I guess what I'm going to implore you to do is if you're not having regular touch points with your team throughout the course of the year, please do that. Have check-ins. I know it's more difficult in a remote setting, but make sure that you do it. It goes a very long way for your employees. And if you're a practitioner or an employee, an individual contributor, maybe you have to initiate that conversation with your manager, just to really make sure that everyone's on the same page, because hiring and firing is not easy. It doesn't matter what industry it's in. It's an industry that we've both built careers off of. And I can say firsthand that the process can suck. you know, so that's why we spend as much time educating and providing information around this. Is it's much easier to retain people than it is to hire them. So make sure that you are doing what you can, controlling what you can control to retain your own team, because you're up against a very competitive market. So these are easy wins that you being more involved as a leader and as a manager, you may prevent yourself from, losing that analyst or that manager or even that director. Some attrition is absolutely irreversible. Can't be prevented. Someone's ready to grow. You don't have the opportunity for them. They got to go elsewhere. But for that type of stuff, you're entering a pretty shark infested water, I guess is what I'll say, if you need to hire sometime in the next couple of months. So again, Scotty, I'll give it over to you one more time. Any closing thoughts, questions, anything like that?
I think, to your point, you want to do your best to eliminate regrettable turnover. Some attrition is natural. It's going to happen. It should happen, but you don't want to be blindsided. So everybody that's watching, I think, should just get familiar with the term state interview. And what I mean when I say that is it's what you said, Joe, but you might want to formalize this. So every fourth one-on-one or whatever, at least twice a year, ask the questions that you're afraid of what the answers might be. Yeah. And the best time to do it is when your gut feeling is like, oh, I'm going to lose this person. If it's going to be regrettable, then sit down and have a real conversation about where they're coming from and what you can do to keep them. It's so much easier to have a stay interview when someone's still, engaged than it is to try to counter them when they've got an offer on the table. So, and that's the other thing, like counter offers happen. Why aren't they happening proactively? So, like you said, Joe, we've had these conversations for anybody who's watching that's a Treasury hiring manager that has, direct reports today. Get out in front of it, because we've heard from plenty of people who, they're not going to be sticking around. So.
Yep, they're just waiting on the right opportunity. And then given what we've seen in the market so far, that opportunity could pop up at any time, right? So anything else from the audience or anything? All right, with that, thanks to those of you that have tuned in. We'll wrap up this chat. As always, join us every Wednesday for LinkedIn Live Practitioner Chats. This is just our special edition jobs update. And then join us Fridays for Ask a Treasurer, Mondays for Ask a Treasury Recruiter. And outside of that, reach out to us if you need anything. Thanks for tuning in.